So I'm gonna make a piece for a charity auction for Camp Moore. Now, Camp Moore is I think it's a week-long summer camp here in Oregon for kids for teenagers who have a stutter. Now I have a stutter, and I think one of the reasons why I do the YouTube thing is I can talk to the camera in the shop by myself just fine. So it's like a way for me to communicate. I think in thinking about it, I think folks who have a stutter oftentimes hide it. So it's actually really rare to meet anyone else with a stutter. So to have a camp for kids who are right at that coming of age to be able to hang out and meet a whole bunch of other people who are going through the same thing is life changing. This is definitely a cause that I like to get behind. So what I want to do is a bowl that I've thought about doing something like this, and I just haven't gotten to it. But it's where you take a flat piece of material, cut it into rings, and stack those rings up, and then turn that into a form. So I've got these pieces of maple that I cut, I don't know, a year, 2 years ago, and they've spalted a little bit. And I thought it'd be cool to kind of take this flat surface and kind of pull it up into a form and then turn it. Thought that'd be kind of neat.
These two pieces of maple needed a little bit of cleaning up. I got the bark off of the outside edge. Then they were ready for jointing and planing. They were somewhat irregular, but they weren't real long. The joining and the planing didn't have to take off a huge amount, although one of the sides took a while to get down to a planed surface. Once the joining's done, I can plane the other side, and the spalting was pretty nice.
So now that it's planed, you can kind of see this side, the pattern matches up, and I think this must be where the cut is. So if you look at the other side, they're completely different. So just going through that much wood, the pattern changes that much.
I need to figure out where to draw the circle to make the cut for the stack of pieces to make the bowl. Also, I figured I could make 2 bowls out of these pieces of wood. After looking at the defects in the wood and sort of where I wanted the circle to be, I decided the center wasn't going to be at the seam. So I made some spacer blocks at the same thickness as the pieces of maple, so I could have the center on one side not be on the piece of maple. They would be on the little spacer blocks. And I could draw the different rings I was going to need to cut. Then I cut the pieces in half, and I could then have each half for each of the bowls. I drilled a small hole that a screw head will go into, and that'll be the center of the rings, and I can rotate the wood around that center hole on the bandsaw to make the cut. I thought about just following my lines that I had drawn for the circles. I think that would have worked, but I thought it'd be a little more accurate if I actually followed a center pin. So I did a practice cut on a scrap piece of wood, and my sled that I usually use for cutting bowl blanks on the bandsaw would work, but I didn't have enough material to move the pin close enough to the blade to do the smallest ring, basically to cut the bottom piece for the bowl. So I made a new sled for the bandsaw table that would extend beyond where the blade is, so I could move that pin wherever it needed to go. Then I could cut my actual pieces of maple. So for a lot of setup, the actual cutting only took a few minutes. And I can do my smallest piece, making the bottom of the bowl. I cut off my spacer blocks. I had cut my rings as half circles, so I was going to need to glue those halves back together again. And I thought I would put a piece in that seam so that I wouldn't just be gluing the two halves of the circles together. I would have a sort of a piece in there to celebrate that joint. So I cut some maple down to make that accent piece in the seam of the bowl. And as the rings are cut at a 45-degree angle, I cut a 45-degree angle into the ends of the pieces for the seams. And they'll be close to the shape of the section of the rings. It's more the thickness and the flatness of these pieces that's important than the overall shape. I can sand the seams on the rings and the pieces that I just made and glue the rings into complete circles. For the bigger rings, I could use the clamps, and for the bottom piece, I used tape. That seemed to work a little better. Then once that had dried, I could sand the faces of the rings, as the rings will get glued and stacked together. The small bottom piece I found I couldn't hold and sand on the disc sander. So I attached the faceplate that would go onto this piece when it's on the lathe, and I could use the faceplate to hold the piece on the disc sander. Then I could glue the rings together. Now, up until this point, I had been working on two bowls at the same time, and I kind of stopped with one of them and continued on with one of them. So I sort of had a backup, which is always nice. I have it together, and now I can do the first turning on this piece, and I just want to get it round and get the walls and get the sides a little bit thinner. And I then want to put this on the CNC machine and cut something like a bow tie across the seam in the bowl to sort of stitch the two halves together. So I cleaned up the outside and I cleaned up the inside, and I got it round and started to give it just a little bit of shape. I really didn't want it to just be a cone. I can move over to the CNC machine and take the faceplate off.
Bed goes up.
And mount this to my adjustable table and rotate the bowl so that the side is roughly horizontal.
Bed goes down.
I couldn't find my regular level, so I used a little camera level. Once the piece is roughly horizontal, I can treat it like a flat piece of material, and I can cut my shape across the seam. Now that those are cut, I can take that out, and I can cut the plugs that will go into those holes. I didn't do the tapered sides on this. I just kept the sides parallel. I can cut the plugs off on the radial arm saw. Then it's just a matter of gluing the plugs into place. They were a little on the tight side, but they went in. Once that glue sets up, I can put the faceplate back on again and put it back on the lathe. Now, as this was spalted wood, it was a little bit on the soft side. It was a little bit of a challenge to turn, so I tried some wood hardener on the piece. It's not the end-all solution, but it definitely helped. So I can turn the stumps of the plugs off and get the bowl round again. At this point, the sides were starting to get pretty thin, and I couldn't make any mistakes. I had to find the shape with what I had. I had the outside where I liked it, and I could work on the rim, then shape the inside. I scraped the outside and the inside to get them a little smoother, and it was looking pretty good. I was just taking off the smallest amounts at this point. Then I started sanding, and I decided I would stop sanding and I would put a coat of wood hardener on again. So this isn't the final finish, this is just me putting wood hardener on. Then I would sand again, so I wouldn't be changing the shape, but I would just have a better surface to work with. And it goes on and it soaks in, and you put more on and it's more soaks in, and it just keeps soaking in and soaking in. It's like trying to paint a sponge. Then I could do a final sanding. It was feeling better and better. So at this point I have the top and the rim the way I like it, and I can turn the bowl around and work on the base, which is really just a matter of taking the mass off of the bottom and finding the final form of the bowl. Once I had the shape right, I could put more wood hardener on. Then sand to get the final finish. Now the form and the finish are done, and it smells okay. I can sand the bump off the bottom and make a flat bottom for the bowl. Then I can put finish on, and I just used walnut oil. Then I can burn my name into the bottom. I probably should have done this before the finish, but it didn't really matter. And it's done. And it turned out kind of interesting. Thanks for watching.